I have no idea what this means to me. Okay, first of all, in order not to ramble, I told Rick I would not ramble. I have to have notes to refer to occasionally. I'd like to bring you greetings from the third world. We live in a zone that is nominally part of the United States, but how many of you have to go through a checkpoint to go to the grocery store or to go to town? We go through checkpoints all the time because we're near the border, and it's just different there. That's all I'll say at this point. This gives you an idea of our location. You heard about the elevation gradient. Essentially, my story is one, begins at birth. And I won't bore you with all the details. I did not grow up on a ranch. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, when Phoenix had less than 100,000 people, and Maricopa County was the 5th largest agricultural producer in the nation. And I watched it transition into what it is today, and I can't even go there anymore. I mean, it's just beyond belief. But when we hear about the loss of agricultural lands, or the loss of agricultural water, or loss of productive potential, and the kinds of priorities that we see our society making with regard to agricultural lands and working landscapes all the time, it's a story I know well, and that I am totally passionately involved in being whatever one can be, an anchor or someone working the other way. So my life has always been a little bit about alternatives to the mainstream. I can't help it, it's the way I'm wired. I started out as an 11-year-old in 4-H, and was fortunate to have a neighbor that had some land and allowed me to keep a calf on his place and raise a steer. My dad told me that we can't afford to do that kind of thing. You're going to have to figure out a way to pay for it. So I got a paper route, and I worked my paper route and bought feed and raised my calf. And each year would do that. And one good deed leads to another. And before you know it, you have to be careful what you dream, because you just might get there. So I spent some time as a horseshoer, eventually got a couple of bachelor's degrees in agriculture, became an ag teacher, moved to Washington State, taught agriculture, immediately started farming on a lease, and then bought a place. We raised sheep, a few cattle, blah, blah, blah. And about 22 years ago, we were finally able to buy a ranch of our own. It was a forest permit. It was very run down. It was in very rough country, very brushy, 50,000 acres with less than 1% private land. And we worked that for 10 years. It was some of the best years of my life in many respects, but it was also really tough. And then we sold that ranch and moved to our present ranch a little over 12 years ago. And most of these photographs would be from the place where we are now, and probably the place where we'll die. And essentially, I have always been a teacher. I was the oldest of 7 kids, so I grew up changing diapers and teaching the younger kids how to do things, and it was just sort of part of the program that, so after we started ranching full-time, I was going to give that up, and somebody ratted me out to the community college, and I ended up teaching 1 class per semester at the community college. I did that for over 20 years, classes related to agriculture, natural resource, and animal nutrition, and so forth. What we have done at our place is try to figure out a way to make the ranch sustainable and profitable, and do that in a way that recognized the natural resource base, or the ecology within which we were operating, and try to match what we expected of the land with what we felt that the land could provide. And in the process, diversified in ways that we could never have predicted. And so I'll talk first about economics. The business side of ranching requires the same thing that every business does, and that is that your income is supposed to meet or exceed your outflow. You know, this is pretty much basic stuff. It's not difficult, but if you don't get that part right, you just don't get to stay in the game very long. And so, among other things, we had the experience of diving into debt and then watching our debt get bigger and bigger and bigger for a considerable period of time, and starting to realize that, man, we got to make some changes. And that ranching in the conventional way was not going to cut it for us. And by conventional, most of my neighbors would tell you, first handshake, I'm a cow-calf producer, we do this, this, and this, we raise black cattle, blah, blah, blah. I don't have anything bad to say about any of my neighbors. They're all doing things the right way for them. But we had to do things that work for us. And what I realized is that, A, we're price takers when we are cow-calf producers selling into the commodity market. I wanted to be a price maker. I wanted to be able to set the price for my product and build in profit. And so starting in 1996, we started carrying over some yearlings and selling what we called then locker beef. We just ran a little ad in the Thrifty Nickel or the Dandy Dime and said, you know, half beef available, ranch raised, all natural, you know, call us. And started to get some business. Today we do 2 farmers markets a week. We're in 3 or 4 food co-ops, 3 or 4 restaurants, and then we sell quite a number of sides of beef directly to the customers to go, you know, use for home use. We also added a little irrigated farm about 8 years ago, and we mostly have our sheep on that farm now. We also cut a little bit of hay off of that. It's not much of a farm, and we're not very good farmers. I don't think we claim to be much of a farmer. Nothing against farmers, of course, I respect them, but you have to be a good mechanic to be a farmer and keep stuff going, but that's about it. So the other thing that I felt real strongly about is that we were facing a crisis in agriculture in general. If we could kind of get the economics dialed in a little bit, and that meant getting more for the products that we produced as well as spending less to get those products, then we needed to look at ways of powering the system that would be reasonable and sustainable. So the thing I was most familiar with was shamelessly exploiting the energy of youth. I could get young folks to do things that they wouldn't normally do for a fraction of the cost of real labor. And all I had to do was be really tolerant about their mistakes and their misguided judgments and so forth, and kind of stay with them. And soon they would morph into amazing, sort of self-directed, self-motivated employees. And that dream continues to draw me into these kinds of relationships with students that are never ending. So over the years, we've probably had at least 100 student interns, apprentices, graduate students, friends of our kids that came over and just wanted to help buck hay or whatever. And I feel that the key to the future of food production in our country is to cultivate good relationships with young people who want to be on the land, whose minds are hungry for knowledge, and who can't learn the kind of stuff that we do in a classroom. Mostly it just isn't taught in classrooms, and I don't think it can be learned that way. I think it has to be learned hands-on. And so that's been the kind of the theme, is get the business part right, get the energy to get the work done, and then the third piece of it that I think is really, really important is to adapt our production practices to the environment that we're working in. So we know irrefutably that our present state is perennial drought. Last summer we had a fabulous summer. It was the first average summer rainfall I've seen in my entire life. It was amazing. We got great production. We haven't had 3/10 since then. But I'm thankful for a good summer. In our situation, our ranch, water is the limiting resource. It's really not forage. We have a fabulous mix of plants and an incredible diversity because of the geology and the terrain. About half the ranch is mountainous. These are very mineralized mountains. On one end is Bisbee, on the other end is Tombstone. Both of those were famous kind of gold rush, silver rush towns. Every wrinkle in the mountains is a different geological makeup. A lot of limestone, a lot of igneous rock. So the outwash from each of these valleys draining out of the mountains, the soil is different. And you can see the vegetative changes. And just riding across the landscape, you'll go from shrub-dominated to ocotillo-dominated to grass-dominated. And so figuring out ways to utilize that landscape that would be relatively easy from a labor standpoint, wouldn't require building thousands of miles of fences, and would end up still producing, healthy cows and some weight gain on animals that were trying to turn into meat. That piece of it, it's one of the things that's so wonderful about ranching is that you never have it all. You're constantly stepping half the distance to the wall or peeling the onion for another layer or whatever. So the longer I'm there, the more I feel like I'm learning. But I know we have more than 50 species of grasses. We've got shrubs of all different kinds. The things we used to think of as inedible were inedible until we got goats. They were inedible until we got sheep. They were inedible when used at this time of year, but if we change the rotation so that they're used after frost, suddenly they become palatable. And so we now winter in the mountains and summer down low, the opposite of what you might do in Colorado. We take advantage of the cool season grasses that are available in the mountains. When we get snow, if we have 8 inches of snow on the ground in the mountains, we think it's fabulous. If the windshield gets dusted on the pickup truck at home, that's amazing. So balancing those components has put us in a situation where now we have to ask for a definition for this new ranch. Rick wrote me this little email. He said, I'd like for you to speak at our conference, and the topic that you'll speak on is the new ranch. Our ranch is old. I mean, everything. I thought, first of all, what does the new ranch mean? I used to think it was really great if I got a new pair of boots. And so mostly on the kinds of ranches that what I think of as regular people can afford to acquire and own and operate, they're mostly old ranches. So the new ranch has to be about thinking and about thought processes. And then I said, oh, this is good. This could be a good topic. So what I really wanted to share with you is a concept that I call ranching in the right hemisphere. And what that's about is a different way of thinking. And I think that agriculture has been dominated by what I call left-brain thinking. This is very linear, very mathematical, very clinical kind of diagnosis of problems and surgical solutions to things. And instead, we need to think more like an organism. All the other organisms, they don't think, but anyway, we're capable of thinking. We need to behave more like other organisms within the ecosystem and try to have our operations be a little more harmonious with what's out there. We're time-limited visitors in an ecosystem that's got tens of thousands of years of history of change, part of it is perhaps evolutionary, but a lot of it is just variation and chaos in various forms. And we're here now in a landscape that reflects, by and large, all of that past history layered over with a very short time of management mistakes that were made over the last 150 years or so. By well-meaning, well-intentioned, sincere, hard-working, good people that misread signals. And as Grady was giving his talk and talking about managers needing to make decisions, being quick about making decisions, and I was thinking, yeah, then we have to live with those decisions. And sometimes we live with them for a long time. So we do our best to think through what we need to do, and then to act decisively before it's too late, and always give ourselves the comfort that comes from the resilience that we built in. In other words, that resilience is we don't have to go to the edge and panic before we leave, but we have some time to think about, is there a better way to get down off this thing? Can we do it a little bit more gently, calmly, and without catastrophic consequences, and live with ourselves the next day, the next week, the next decade. And so, getting to that place, once again, so I don't ramble, we wanted to utilize both the best of the old and the best of the new. So there are no answers in any one realm. There's a lot of tradition in ranching and in agriculture, and most of that tradition is it's our cultural legacy, it's our the firm footing and the thing that gives us confidence to do the right thing. So for us, it means animal power. It means the cows are out there climbing the hillsides, harvesting the feed. We don't feed any cows. The only thing we put out for them is salt that's mined in Redmond, Utah, that's from a dry lake bed that has a lot of trace minerals in it. We don't supplement any protein because we are fortunate to be in a landscape that has year-round green plants. By moving the cattle, they can access protein on a year-round basis. Sometimes it's prickly pear, sometimes it's mesquite flowers or leaves or beans, sometimes it's green-growing grasses, sometimes it's cured native grasses that still have 9 to 11% protein. But we found that after doing the normal thing that my neighbors did, buy a semi-load of molasses tubs every year, and other people go on vacation, go to Hawaii and stuff, and we buy tubs. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So we don't buy tubs anymore, haven't for years. But we move cows. And we move cows with horses because that's what they're for. And that's how we can justify having them. We had to look at genetics. And genetics is ancient history compressed into a population of animals that grew up under certain kinds of selection pressure. And I grew up as a kid. My grandfather raised Hereford cattle. He was one of the early people in his area to cross with Angus and create a black whiteface, and he told me, these black whiteface cows are the best cows on the planet. And I said, yeah, I know that, Grandpa, I know that. And he was right for where he was. But for us, we needed to look at Africa. We needed to look at a place in the same latitude as we were, with similar kinds of environmental stress, similar kinds of shortages, and similar kinds of grazing behavior or browsing behavior. And so years ago, my grandfather's brother lived in Denver. He was in the oil business, and he had a friend who had a ranch up in Saratoga, Wyoming, who was also an oil man, and he had quite a bit of money, but he was really, in his heart, he was a cattleman. It was a guy named John Rouse. And John Rouse wrote 4 volumes that I know of, 3 volume set called World Cattle, and a 4th volume called Criollo, Cattle of the Americas. And I got that book when I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I read it cover to cover, and I always had this thing in my mind. The closest thing we had in this country were longhorns, and I knew longhorns wouldn't really be so great in Arizona. It's such a horn spread, they never get through all the brush, so thorny things. I found out, Ed Fredrickson, who's a research scientist, had been at the Hornada Research Experimental Range in Las Cruces, and he had been poking around down in Chihuahua and in Baja California looking for what he was calling desert-adapted cattle, and had found a population of Criollo cattle that he thought would work if predictions for climate change in New Mexico and Arizona turned out to be as bad as the climate scientists said. And as soon as he told me that that's what they were doing, I said, man, I would like some of those cattle. I would like to try them out. If you ever get enough that you can sell some, I'd buy them. And so a couple years later, he called me. He said, you know, we've got a few extra blah, blah, blah. And I bought a few bulls and about a dozen red heifers, and we started running them. Well, we're now in the process of converting our whole operation over from what I would consider to be desert-adapted, British Isle-oriented cattle. Pretty darn good cattle for British origin cattle. But we've killed all the bulls and hamburgered them. And all the bulls that are running now on our place are Criollo bulls, and then we now have about maybe 45 or 50 pure Criollo cows, and we're still building that side of it up. What I like about them, besides the fact that they cover the country extremely well, they naturally are browsers, so they're constantly sampling all the shrubs and making use of them. They're very gentle, they have a calm disposition. They are scrappers when it comes to, I mean, their calves hit the ground, they bounce up, and they just immediately start following the cow around. We never have calving issues. I mean, they're amazing cattle. But that part is all just fine. We expect that of any cow in our part of the world. What's great about them is they marble on prickly pear and mesquite and old dried up yellow grasses. They marble like an Angus on corn. It's amazing. They have ribeyes that are not as big, but they're tender and they're flavorful. And my farmers market customers are all over. They're like, okay, you have any Criollo chuck steaks? And they're asking for chuck steaks. They're not even asking for ribeye. Well, they ask for ribeyes too, but they are eating the whole animal and liking all of that. And for me, as somebody that retails beef, this is the animal we have in our part of the world. So I'm very pleased with them. The same thing is true of the sheep. Years and years ago, Deb and I had Columbians up in eastern Washington, crossed them on with Suffolk bucks. That was a standard thing then. English origin sheep, not desert sheep. And when we got these Navajo churro sheep, holy moly, they're like, it's the same kind of thing. They plop out these little tiny lambs. You know, have we ever pulled a lamb on a churro? Never. Not that I can remember. We don't do that. They bond to their mothers right away. They stick together. When we turn them out, you know, they have good flock instinct. We have the goats. I'll tell you quickly about the goats. We bought a group of goats. Some of them were Spanish goats, and some of them were Boer goats, and some of them were crosses. What I found is that the Boers have a nice big carcass. They're a meaty goat, but they came from South Africa. And maybe the living is different there. I think maybe the labor situation is different there. And they have young kids that will go out with the goats every day, or maybe the old people. In this country, you can't find anybody to go out with the goats. Everybody's busy texting or doing Facebook, and we can't get people to go out with the goats. So I needed goats that I could trust to go out on their own with guard dogs. Guard dogs that still work pretty cheap, and so the guard dogs will go with them. And everything went went really well for years. And then my neighbors put up a hay barn about 3 miles from our headquarters. And one day our goats found the hay barn. And I'll just tell you that it was a year of downhill relations with my neighbors, punctuated by a conversation that threatened death. And I didn't know for sure specifically if it was death for the goats or death for me or suicide for them. I don't know, but it was bad, and I had to sell the goats, so we sold them to a different neighbor, far enough away they'd never find this hay barn again. And I now buy the goats from him because we can't keep them on our place because they smell hay miles away, I guess. But goats, sheep, cattle. I'll just tell you, I still harbor secret plans for reintroducing the goats, but with enough goats that we can have somebody go with them. And I haven't figured out quite how we'll do that yet. But the goats on a shrub landscape, they're the right animals. I mean, they really are amazing. They eat a lot of things that have real high terpene levels and things that you smell and you go, oh, nobody would eat that. And things that cattle walk by every day and never touch. Goats can make a good living. And meat still tastes fabulous. So, okay. A few other things for your vacation here. We felt like it was important to end the debt. Like most ranchers, we had an operating loan, a line of credit. It was going to be $20,000, and then it was going to be $30,000, and then $50,000, and then $100,000, and you know, it was getting out of hand. And we ultimately we set a goal to be debt-free, and we were fortunate. I have been a land trust board member for close to 20 years, and I've always believed that it was possible to have an array of products from a ranch landscape that might not appeal to everyone, but there's something that could appeal to almost anyone. And as it turns out, open space, wildlife habitat, potential for future food production are things that appeal to a fairly significant part of the population. Cut to the chase, we've completed 2 conservation easements on our ranch, and about half of our needed land is now under easement. We did one for 960 acres with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Arizona Game and Fish that was specifically to preserve habitat for species of concern. These were species that were just below the threshold of endangered or threatened. And we were able, under that, we were able to put in our own language in the easement. The main thing that the Fish and Wildlife Service was interested in was that we continue to ranch and basically continue to do things as we do. And the kicker in our area was no residential subdivision, no fragmentation of that landscape. We can build whatever agriculture-related buildings we need to do. We can put in new fences, pipelines, dams, wells. We can cut trees, sell rocks, do all kinds of things. We can put in billboards, motocross racetracks, helicopter landing pads, or condominiums and subdivisions. That easement gave us enough money to pay off our mortgage. And we recently completed, within about a year or so ago, completed a second easement on 1,450 acres, which was done with the NRCS under the GRP Progressive Reserve Program. And that gave us the proceeds that we needed to pay off our operating loan and put money in the bank. So we feel incredibly fortunate today to be debt-free and to see a way that we can pass this ranch on to the next generation without the burden of debt. And that's a huge gift, in my view. And we're thankful for that every day. A large part of the idea of sustainability involves making progress. You can't stand still. And progress sometimes is going backwards. And so one of the things that we've done, besides no longer feeding supplements, is we have scaled back from the use of fossil fuels as much as we possibly can. Our ranch, it never did have an electrical line go to it. So we've lived, both ranches, been off the grid for 22 years. We're powered entirely by solar and wind and muscle power, except for the pickup trucks and the quads that we need to pull trailers. Most of the time, if we have the opportunity, we trot out from the house. If we have to go far, then we'll drag a trailer out as far as we need to go. The meat business requires motorized transportation, although we joke about rigging up a farmer's market wagon that we pull with our mules, but we'll see if we ever get there. But an area where technology has been very helpful is with two simple devices that I have, which I'm using for this little slideshow, and an iPhone. There's some iPhone apps that are incredible, and I don't know if any of you have seen these. One is called Theodolite, and Theodolite is like a $2 app that takes a photograph with your phone, but it gives you the elevation, it gives you compass, absolute compass, and GPS location for the photograph. It gives you the time and date, all on the screen, all on the photo, so that for repeat photography, for monitoring, it's such a piece of cake to match photographs. It's amazing. You can just set it up, you have your little indexes or whatever of your past photos, you just match all the stuff, click, and it's done. And that's one example of the kind of things that we can do with technology. When we're selling meat and somebody has a question about what is it like, what are your steaks like, and I can take a picture of a cryovac package of ribeyes and send it to them by email and say, notice the marbling, and they'll be like, farmers market Saturday, and it's just really made a big difference for us, not to mention communication. As long as everybody remembers to bring their phone, you can actually talk to each other and say, well, I see a little bunch of cows up on that bridge. Can you get to them over there? Yeah, I got them, okay. And go and do that. So technology is mostly good. A big dilemma is this generational transfer. And I wanted to share with you quickly what I think is right for us. And I don't say it's right for everybody else, but I'm quite sure it's right for us. Our business is organized as a corporation. It's a family corporation. Currently, we have 2 stockholders, 2 officers, and 2 shareholders, and they're both in the room today with you. What we're concerned about, we have 2 kids as well. One of them right now is saying, there's no way in hell I'm going back to the ranch, Dad. The other one's saying, well, maybe, maybe. But we're both old. And we're not real old, but we're getting to where we think about how vacations might be kind of fun. 7 days a week, this is a great deal to come here because we didn't have to do any real work today or yesterday. But transition to the next generation is really a dilemma for most people in farming and ranching. And I want to do it without involving the IRS or bankers, if possible. And so what I've come up with is a way that I think will be of some value for us. We hired a woman, a 30-year-old person, first of the year. She has a master's in range from New Mexico State, got an undergrad degree from Oregon State in something related to natural resources. And we stole her from the Forest Service when they shut down the government for 3 weeks, and we invited her to come and stay with us while she was locked out of her job. And of course, we've been kind of, Deb and I made a hit list. Who would you want to work with, and who do you feel would have the right set of skills and personality and so on to come into this business? And the deal we made with her was that she would work as a person on a salary for 1 year. The second year, she would earn shares of stock in the company. And each year that she worked with us, her shares would increase. We will never issue any more stock than we already have. So we will carve into our share so that our share diminishes and her share increases. We made the hit list with 4 people's names on it. And we've had meetings with all 4 of those people. Each of them is in a sort of a phased transition into this thing. Some may never be in the company, but they may work with us in some other role, doing contract work with us or whatever. But what we foresee is a business where there may be 3 or 4 owners or 3 or 4 shareholders down the road, all of who have earned their way into the company through sweat equity. We don't lose our home when we become old and feeble. We can still sit on the porch, and as long as our minds are intact, we have some value. And these folks, so far, they're promising not to just, let us starve to death out there. We're just ruling. But anyway, by then it won't matter anyway. But so that's kind of the big picture of that plan. And what I think is great about it, we did not close the door for our children. And we've said if our kids come to the place where they want to do this, they can come into the company, but they come in under the same kind of deal as anybody else. They have to be of some value to the company. They got to work, and they got to earn their shares. And ironically, I think that they're good with that. They're good with that concept. And so that's an idea for transition of the assets. The corporation has perpetual life, and so we don't have to have go through all the stuff of listing the branch and having the realtor take an 8% commission and blah, blah, blah. So, the next thing, I would like to talk a little bit about restoration. And the main thing here is that and I think most people, certainly I can speak for the ranches that I know in Arizona, all of them are in need of restoration. All of them have had some problems with regard to overuse, catastrophic climatic events. Does that mean I have 10 minutes? I don't want to throw the ball. Anyway, so we've got some erosion issues. We've got some areas that need improvement in terms of cover. We've got water retention area. We want all the rain that falls on the range to stay on the range. We don't get enough as it is. And so part of what we've tried to do, first of all, is leave a bristly cover. To leave enough. And for us, we have mostly taller grasses. And so I like to leave something that's, I go back to the old SRM thing of pick half, leave half. We think about drought resilience as being on the day that we know that we're in a total wreck and it's a bomb out. We could stay on the ranch a year and rotate clear around the ranch before we really have to sell anything because we're way understocked. So we have a permit for 460 head. We're running about 200 cows. We have a significant number of 2-year-olds, yearlings, and of course the calves that are on the cows. And we have the flexibility to say, okay, we're running short on feed, so we're going to market some calves or market some yearlings, or we might need to go look for some pasture for yearlings. We've got a lot of flexibility, so we don't have to panic with drought. And honestly, when I say we think of drought as a perpetual state even the climate science people would say that we've been in about 14 years of climate in our area. So we're not just making this stuff up. But there's still plenty to eat out there, ironically. These grasses are adapted to grow, and the woody component is pretty amazingly forgiving. Okay, that wasn't supposed to repeat so soon, but I'm sorry that we did it. Okay, anyway. So, the other thing is partnerships, and we've realized that we can't do all the things that we can imagine doing. So enterprise diversification is one of the ways that most of the economists will tell you that you can bring more wealth to a ranch. And for us, bringing more wealth is not so we can take better vacations, it's so that we can afford to hire and add these other people that we want to come into the ranch. And so what we have to do is look at the resource base that we have, and then look at what do we need to do to generate revenue from enterprises that are complementary to what we do already. Basically, for our, for my purposes, I would define myself as primarily a food producer, creating meat, and an educator helping young people learn the craft knowledge and skills necessary to operate a ranch. So, we have some interesting other things that we're working on. Let me tell you about it real quickly. One is that we have an abundance of thorny plants. And it turns out that there are some of those thorny plants which have a very high value if you put in the effort to create dollar added value. So some of you I saw when I was going down college, a place, little sign said blue agave something or other. I said, agave? We must have tens of thousands of agaves on our ranch. You've probably seen from the photograph. One of the things that you can make from agave is mezcal. Mezcal is an alcoholic beverage with a 10,000-year-old history in our region. And because we're frequent travelers to Mexico, we have, I will admit, sampled on occasion only for cultural anthropology study some of the distilled agave products and found them to be acceptable. And being curious and seeking knowledge, I thought, what if we were to dig around a little bit with some agaves and see what we could do? And of course, having friends that were connoisseurs of these kinds of products and much more involved in it than I would ever be, we formed a little partnership with some friends. One is a couple who are winemakers. They have a winery. They're very familiar with fermentation and so on. And we have another friend who's sort of an amateur backyard distiller. And we say, hey, we got the agaves. We'll cut them, deliver them to you guys, and then you guys distill them. I'll just tell you that we're on our fourth batch, and it's good. And are you holding my finger up there? No? 0? Okay. All right. So we'll see where that goes, but we think it's going to be profitable. And Arizona's in the process of modifying its laws to allow wineries to distill, and when that happens, we'll have a new, more diverse offering. Okay? Is that? Are there any questions?